A little more confidence. The team rallied tighter together. Not that they weren't, and a belief that the hard work and the coaching they're receiving is working. The Cleveland Browns set off to Detroit to hopefully slay another dragon and get this team to 2-2. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate all of you for your support for us whole here at the OBR, whether it's coming for the daily written content from our fantastic group of writers. Oh, make sure while you're there, you're looking into the VIP subscription, gets you into the insider forums, ask the insiders, and of course, it gets bundled with a subscription to Paramount Plus. We appreciate and thank you all for the support for the OBR streaming network. We just continue to grow and grow, and we have all of you to thank for that, of course. Make sure you're subscribed to the OBR on YouTube. Of course, make sure you are subscribed to the OBR over on Twitch. Your first news today, Cleveland Browns actually had everybody on the practice field. So, for players like Mike Hall, we obviously don't know where that bodes yet as far as, making his return back to the field. But certainly good for this team as, they're trying, to get their best 53, 48 out there on the field for game day. And, for guys like Jack Conklin, we'll see. Certainly offensive tackle position certainly is, as I referred to yesterday, it's a deja vu all over again to 2023, kind of mostly the same players being out and now trying to figure out how you're going to patch this kind of all together as you face this Detroit team, short week for Detroit, obviously. I don't put much stock into the short week. I certainly don't put much stock into the short week when you win. Certainly, as Detroit did Monday night against the Baltimore Ravens. We can certainly look at, that game and then certainly the Browns game with Baltimore and kind of get, some thoughts. And I think one of the things that kind of stands out to me the most, and, I think Lamar just probably wasn't the best version of himself Monday night against Detroit. But Lamar didn't go down 7 times. Lamar was sacked 7 times. That is a large amount for a player of the stature of Lamar Jackson to be getting sacked with all his athletic ability. It certainly gives you some pause and hesitation, of course, for Joe Flacco about to face this defensive line that unfortunately for Joe was, pretty much a pain in the side, of course, for Lamar Jackson. Yes, Baltimore has their offensive line issues just like the Cleveland Browns do. But with the Browns, it'll be at least one different starter, perhaps 2 if Jack Conklin is unable to go. And, I think Detroit, defensively in some ways is kind of similar to what the Browns want to do. They just, so much of it is prevalent and relevant on the defensive line, getting after the quarterback and just basically disrupting timing, disrupting play structure, disrupting play development, play action, all of that stuff. Just trying to take the offense out of their rhythm, so to speak. Baltimore, the numbers are a little skewed because of what Lamar was able to do with his legs. Derrick Henry again was under 4 yards per carry. Now, you really, if you're the Browns, to even make this a game, it's got to be a game where Quinshon Judkins is heavily involved. and highly successful. Detroit can score, and Detroit can score a ton. Now, they sack the quarterback a lot. They get a lot of turnovers on defense, and they put up a lot of points. Detroit is, it's just kind of like a hurricane of a team sometimes. In a lot of games they've been playing and been, really successful in over the last few years is you just kind of get into that vortex and, before you even catch a second to catch your breath and you look up and you look at the scoreboard and, you're down 3 scores before you even kind of even knew what happened. They come hard, and it's all gas, no break with the Detroit Lions. So the running game is going to be key. It's going to be paramount. Um, there was, asked of Tommy Reese today why Dylan Sampson only garnered 5 snaps last week. And, after week 1 and, getting a little involved in week 2, scoring his first career touchdown was certainly odd that Dylan Sampson was so limited in his playing time last week. And I think for most of us, as we figured, Quinshon Judkins, to get and settled in and more into the fold, we figured that was going to harm Jerome Ford's snaps, not necessarily Dylan Sampson's. I've always been one to kind of defend Ford more than most, but even I kind of feel that was egregious. And the future of this backfield is certainly Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson. And for the Browns to be able to even make this a game on Sunday in Detroit, both of these guys are going to have to be factors, and it's just going to have to be consistent. And, it certainly was, beneficial for Quinshon Judkins' numbers in week 2 and in week 3 to have a carry over 30 yards. The numbers got to be more consistent. And, you need that 4, 5, 5, 4, 6. You can take in a 3 or a 2. You understand it's going to happen. But the 30-yard run is it's not going to, change the momentum of time of possession and, keep the Lions offense as spectators and, get the Browns defense the rest they need. Detroit's got a variety of pass rushers, all of whom were involved in getting after Lamar Jackson on Monday night. And to this point, other than week 2 against the Bears, and you got to keep in mind the Bears numbers really, you can kind of look at with a grain of salt as well, because when the Bears and the Lions faced in week 2, it was again, Detroit just absolutely getting out there and getting on the gas pedal. And, from that point on, they can kind of just sit back, rush the quarterback, and try to force the quarterback into mistakes. I was talking with Dave Bacon for Sports for CLE, and they're kind enough to have a bunch of us from the OBR over on to do segments on their show, and we always appreciate it. And you guys know I'm kind of adamant for what Joe Flacco is doing at this point. What Joe is doing for me is not enough where I say, okay, it's Joe for the, entirety of the season. For what he's doing right now statistically, I think Dylan Gabriel could probably put up the same numbers. And yes, I do agree, of course, that Joe is, keeping a lot of these guys in line and, assisting and also preventing and helping to prevent, of course, any pre-snap penalties by getting guys lined up and things of that nature, of course. But there also is the possibility that Joe could start playing a little better. He, you know, practiced, of course, during training camp, didn't miss any time. He was the only quarterback who didn't. But, you know, it's not to say that Joe got all the work that he probably could have used. And I don't disagree with the plan. I mean, you certainly weren't going to overwork the 40-year-old quarterback in August. So there is certainly the possibility that Joe can pick it up here a little bit and start playing a little better. And, if there was a week to do it, why not against a team like Detroit? Jerry Jeudy versus Terrion Arnold is certainly a very, very interesting matchup to follow here this week. Because Terrion Arnold has, had some difficulties, no doubt, to this point. So therefore, you're going to need to kind of capitalize on that. And the Browns really haven't gotten, much out of Jerry Jeudy at this point. And, as huge as a factor as he was last year and, essentially losses in games that ended up not really mattering, Jerry Judy's not really been able to put up much production to this point. And you would have to think if you're the Browns, that's a huge focal point of what you're trying to accomplish right now. I mean, the same could be said, of course, for David Njoku. These are the Browns, top two receiving targets. And it's great that you're working in the kids. It's great that Cedric Tillman is, rounding back into, a little bit of the successful form we saw from him last year, of course, before the concussion. But, you need your big game hunters to, be big in the big game. And if that's something they can kind of get going this week, Judy and Njoku with some regular consistency, now all of a sudden, you're in a position where, you have a lot of things kind of popping for that offense. Browns are certainly trying to make Isaiah Bond a thing. And, his snap percentage is gradually going up, and he was in the 60%, mid 60% range last week. A couple of times I thought, and I said to you all that I really thought Isaiah Bond could have had a bigger impact on last week's game. Browns certainly could have used for Isaiah Bond to have a bigger impact in last week's game, of course. So now with working in all the newness, of course, and it's 5 rookie skill players for the Browns, and trying to keep Judy and Njoku fed and Cedric Tillman. And I thought the issue there, though, is the Browns have now a good amount of mouths to feed, and the offense is just not clicking at a successful enough rate where you can see this, continue to grow, and that's where, regardless of who the quarterback is, and obviously it's Joe for now, the quarterback play 100% has to pick up. There's just no excuses. And I certainly think, with Quinshon Judkins coming in over the last 2 weeks and certainly breathing some life into a running game that absolutely desperately needed it, you have to start, getting things, moving, getting things more balanced, and just having some of these threats like Judy and Njoku become more of the threats that they're believed to be. It's kind of like having, really nice sports car, but locking it in the garage. I think we can see a better version of Joe. I think he could still be in there. And Joe talked yesterday that, his play style is certainly different right now. He's, playing a little closer to the vest, understanding in these tight games just how much one mistake could cost a team in these close games. In 2023, he certainly had the ability to play a little bit more wide open. But of course, this all, has to factor in getting the best version of whatever version of this offensive line that we're going, of course, to see. Lucas most likely going to be your starter at left tackle, still, playing the Jack Conklin game as to when Jack will be headed out on to the field, certainly for Cleveland. I guess most likely, it would be KT Levinson at right tackle. And, the run blocking there certainly needs a lot of, cleaning up as far as, pass protection. So, the Browns, here we are again, you're trying to establish this consistency and, a whole, just consistent moving parts, of course. And, now playing in this game with what'll be what offensive tackle 3 and offensive tackle 4, I guess. So, going down in that department quickly, and it's certainly not, the best recipe for Hutchinson and company. You know, I think Joe's going to have to be really careful with the ball even more this week. Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch, these guys have certainly the reputation as ball hawks. This is things, that have been on these guys' resumes since basically day one in the league. A lot of people, and Kirby Joseph certainly gets himself involved where he gets a reputation of being, maybe called a dirty player at times. But the fact of the matter is he just straight up, gets a lot of turnovers, of course. Now, again, you really need to lean on Quinshon Judkins, but, I think for the Browns to be successful enough to kind of have a hand in controlling the game's pace, you certainly can't do it alone with Quinshon. Certainly, you're going to need Samson and, to a lesser extent, hopefully not Jerome Ford as much. So, yes, I was a guy who's always defended Jerome Ford, but I'm at the point now where I would absolutely rather see Dylan Sampson play than Jerome Ford, of course. Now, for the Browns defensively, I mean, you look at Goff, and he's really, really just gotten comfortable in this system. He really plays well within it. He's only been sacked 4 times to this point, only 1 interception through 3 games. Browns really kind of have to take the pressure up a notch here. When you can get Jared Goff, off his spot is when you see, a lesser version of Jared Goff. And that's where, the turnover propensity can certainly happen. He's not extremely agile. So, I mean, if the sack is there to be had, you're most likely going to get it. Jared Goff is not going to wow you with his feet by any means whatsoever. And, with all due respect to the Green Bay Packers, the Detroit Lions have not faced anything close to the pass rush of the Cleveland Browns to this point. Nobody that they faced is Myles Garrett. Even, considering Micah Parsons, it was a very limited, well, not very, but a limited role, week 1, of course. But what the Browns are getting, up the middle from Maliek Collins and sure Mason Graham is just something that's really coming together, and it's come together really quickly, and it's becoming really consistent. And it's really been fascinating to watch. I mean, and you see the national media is certainly picking up on it, how great the Browns defense, defensive line is, because I think there are some misconceptions out there that the secondary is playing well. I don't know that I would say the secondary is playing that well as much as the defensive line is just dominating so much that the secondary is essentially not a factor, is probably the correct way to put it. And they're just so deep, and, whether it's Wright or whether it's McGuire or whether it's Shelby Harris, and, Mike Hall is certainly out here just waiting in the wings for his opportunity when, he can certainly get back on the field, and he's got to be licking his chops to just get out there, and whatever combination is out there for the Cleveland Browns, and just knowing that you're one of those 4 as a defensive lineman, man, you just, you got to be looking at it like it's free steak at this point, that you just have this massive opportunity to go out there and, get hits on quarterbacks. The running game for Detroit is it's really, really good. And there's kind of like just like 2 versions of it, because Dave Montgomery, who had, the huge, huge night Monday night against Baltimore, Definitely kinda has that Derrick Henry style to him, kinda like where, he's just, the train car going downhill, and that's the case, extremely, extremely difficult to stop. Guys just bounce off him. The guy is, built. He's literally built like a train car. And then there's Jahmyr Gibbs, who's just a really talented runner, has some really, really solid physical athletic attributes, but just has absolutely blazing speed as well. And, that was where I thought it was kinda interesting that Baltimore kinda handled Gibbs a little bit better than they did Montgomery, because you would think if anything with your own defense, you'd be more familiar with a guy like David Montgomery practicing against, Derrick Henry every day. Gibbs is the one that scares the daylights out of you because Gibbs, Gibbs can give you, a 19 carry, 156 yards and 4 scores. And he really and it's when you say he does really well in the red zone, and normally when you talk that way about a running back, people are like, "Oh, okay, inside the 5." No, I mean, like, Gibbs anywhere inside the 20, and because he's just such a quick running back, and he has so much speed on the angle to get to the pylon that there's just very few guys in the NFL that can certainly, catch him through a pursuit angle. So he's the one certainly that just scares the daylights out of you. Montgomery, it's just kinda like Novocaine, it just keeps pounding, it keeps pounding, it keeps pounding. But Gibbs is the one where you just get knocked out because it just happens so quick. This will be a big one certainly for Carson Swessinger, and this will certainly for Swessinger, this will be a fun test because, these backs, are not the same. They are not necessarily similar, and it'll be a really great read for Swessinger to make sure that, he can stay in line, can stay focused, mentally prepped for dealing for the 2, different styles that these 2 running backs are. And, a lot of this defense, as we're learning quickly, is, goes through Carson Swessinger. So certainly a big test for the rookie middle linebacker. Not necessarily sure how the Browns handle the Lions receivers because, Amon-Ra St. Brown just does so many good things and, lines up anywhere. He's strong. He's physical. He can create his own space. Runs the short over the middle routes, can run the deep routes. I mean, one of the biggest plays in Monday night's game is where, St. Brown really made it look like he was gonna block on a running play and, Marlon Humphrey kind of fell for it and, kind of got, okey doked and there was St. Brown open behind him. St. Brown is a guy you really got to be careful with because, when as a volume guy, because like once he gets 2, 3 catches in those first couple of drives, all of a sudden it just feels like it's, the snowball going down the hill because, and now all of a sudden he's just cooking on all cylinders. And, when you are a guy like St. Brown who can just succeed in so many different routes and variations of the routes, it, it, it's, he can just, it comes out like the numbers stack up quickly. And, it because I mean, St. Brown is the type of guy who can catch 2, 3, 4 passes in a row. Because once this guy just gets on a heater, there really are no answers for him. And he's just so smart and comfortable and established within this offensive system that he just gets out there and it's, he can really make your stinking life miserable. Jameson Williams is a really great fit for this team. And because I think he pressures you so much vertically, and you certainly have to honor it because Jamo certainly wins and wins pretty consistently going down the field. And, causation of it obviously is it's opens up running lanes. It opens up and frees up Amon St. Brown. So you're facing this Lions offense, and you play the game of what would we like, and what should we try to take away? It's got to be Gibbs. It really does, because if I'm the Browns, if I can take away Gibbs, and I am consistently putting Detroit in passing situations or obvious passing situations, this is where my guys can kind of tee off. And the offensive line is still a work in progress for Detroit. It was tough losing Frank Ragnow. But you talk to people within Detroit, they kinda knew it was a legit possibility. I think Frank was just, maybe holding out hope that somewhere towards the end, somewhere in his heart, he would feel or believe that his body had it in him. And, you know, we went through it with Jordan Hicks, obviously. And, you can't, once a guy is that close to considering himself retired, just let the man go. So I think the first and foremost thing is you gotta do is you gotta take away Gibbs, because you have to believe and you have to have faith in what your pass rush has been doing to this point. That a Detroit Lion offensive line that is still working on their identity, still trying to nail down, what is the best group, how the best five work together. That's certainly a team with a defensive line with the ability the Cleveland Browns can take advantage of it. You absolutely have to be, believing that that is a certainty, that the Browns should be able to make Jared Goff's life difficult. D-backs are going to have to play, and Miles Harden along with Newsom and Ward, you probably believe it's gonna be a little bit tougher certainly than Green Bay. Amon St. Brown is certainly better than anybody the Green Bay Packers trotted out on the field on Sunday. And it's funny the way things go, right? Because, you look and there's a Ravens-Chiefs game this week, and one of those teams is going to be 1-3. There's just no way around it. Well, I mean, unless they tie, of course. But someone between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens is going to be 1-3 after 4 weeks. And, the Cleveland Browns with a good effort, solid effort, and certainly with a pickup in play from the offense, trying to go in here and stun this Detroit Tiger team and, kind of knock off, another good team 2 weeks in a row, and maybe steal a game or two that, you didn't think you had a chance at stealing. So let's, kind of see how that can work, of course. I you certainly got some guys, with Mason Graham going back to the area where he played in college, of course. And, I think for the young kids, they're really, kind of looking forward to these matchups. This is some really good teams they're facing here from the NFC North. Packers last week, Lions, and of course Vikings and Bears all coming up. And who you're playing the majority of the time when you go, of course, to your team that drafts you, two with, of course, Pittsburgh, two with Baltimore, of course, two with Cincinnati. It's always those, NFC games, where, guys start to understand that, it's, once every few years that you get to see and compete against, and, they all have friends within the league, of course. We'll bring you a show tomorrow, of course, and you'll talk a little bit more about it and try to finalize things up. But I think it would be a disappointment to this point if, the Browns don't show up, and especially after last week and what they did in that game, and, give yet another solid effort. And, maybe Detroit doesn't make some of the same mistakes Green Bay made and, end up giving the Browns the opportunity to steal and seize a victory. But, keep playing that 60 minutes and, see what can possibly come your way if you're the Cleveland Browns. You know, things are looking better than I think most expected, and, a win certainly cures a lot of woes. As always, we appreciate you all, for the support for the OBR. Head on over to the OBR.com for the best Cleveland Browns written content there is. Look into the VIP package, Insider Forums, Ask the Insider. Of course, it gets bundled with Paramount Plus. And for all your support here for the OBR streaming network, beginning daily at 6 o'clock with Browns 3D. We could not thank you all anymore. As always, none of this happens without you all coming out to watch. Make sure you're subscribed to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed to the OBR over on Twitch. All that being said, this has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. And we will talk to y'all tomorrow.